Welcome to the Amp Hour. I'm Dave Jones from the EEV blog.
Hi, Dave. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Kathy Joseph, otherwise known as Kathy Loves Physics on YouTube.
That's how we know you, because we've mentioned you several times on the. We discovered you like what, a couple of months back. When did you explode? On
very end of last year, very end of December.
Really? It was that long ago. Okay.
Right. Yeah, I've been running my YouTube channel for 4.5 years, I think, by then.
Wow. Yeah.
And it had been going slow and steady, and I'd felt really good about things. Yep. So I started my YouTube channel. I felt like it was going slow and steady, and I posted a video on the history of three-phase motors, and it was really disappointing for a while. Right. For like 5 days, they tell you how it's going, and I'm like, oh, I thought it'd do better than that. I really did. And then day 5, it's like suddenly did better. And then suddenly I was getting like, it was crazy. I think on the month of January, I got 5 million views and 60,000 new subscribers in 1 month.
Wow. So how many subscribers did you have before that?
15,000.
Oh, okay. So that's a reasonable, size channel.
I felt happy. Yeah.
And now you've got your YouTube Silver Award.
And now I've got my YouTube Silver Award.
Yes.
Yay. And you gave me a lot of beautiful advice, and I ignored almost all of it.
That's right. Well, because I didn't, when I sent you that email, because I saw you explode on, you suddenly came in all my recommendations, and I went, wow, where has she come from? These videos are amazing on the history of engineering and, like electricity, engineering, physics, kind of stuff. And this content is so great. And I didn't realize you'd been doing it for so long. And I thought, oh, she's just started. And I didn't realize you'd been doing it for 4 years. So that's why it was so polished. So,
polished is an iffy question, but I'm very... When I first started out, I actually tried to make a video where I just told the story without the script.
Yeah.
Or a script of any kind. I mean, I sort of had the stuff written down, and then I just talked. And I was like, this is a mess.
Right.
It felt like a mess. And so I thought, well, I should have a script. But then I couldn't figure out how to make the teleprompter work. So what I did was I wrote a script. I read it to myself. And then I added all sorts of pictures. And then I redid it, but where I only had to read out loud the parts where I wasn't covered.
I got it. Okay. And this is why your scripts are available on your website, and they have, and you've got the photos. It's like a whole blog, an extensive blog article with photos inserted in there in line and everything. It's great.
Thank you. Yeah, I finally hired someone to help me with the website because it was a mess.
Okay.
But I really wanted to, at first I didn't include footnotes in that because I didn't think of giving out the scripts.
Right.
But then I realized that two things. One, so many people want to know where it comes from and want to learn more on their own. And I want to encourage that. And the second thing was that I felt like, I don't know, the more I shared, the more people got interested in it and it just worked positively. I know a lot of people, they don't want to share what they're doing because they're worried about people sort of stealing their thunder.
And they're, because the secret sauce is in how you produce the stuff and do that. So like a lot of YouTubers are very protective of how they do things and
which is totally understandable. Sure. But I'm the other way.
Yep. Same here.
Also, I started this because I started writing a book. And then I didn't know how to get anyone who I didn't know to buy the book.
Right. Okay. So the book came first. Right. For those, I think we should go back. Okay. What is your background and how did you get into making videos and writing the book, which is the Lightning Tamers, which I'll link in down below. I have been reading it. Yes, there it is. There it is. I will include a screen capture overlay and I'll include an Amazon link.
Oh,
down
thank
below.
you.
And it's great. I'm only through a couple of chapters so far because I only got it the other day, and it is absolutely fantastic. And
Oh, thank
so,
you.
okay, so what is your background and how did you get
Right.
into making the videos and writing the book? What is
Um,
and what is the timeline of doing that?
so I am a physicist. Well, I was a physics teacher, high school
Right.
physics teacher. I studied grad school in physics and in engineering science, but I'm great at classes and I was terrible at the research. It turned out I'm good at certain kinds of research,
Got it.
but nobody
Obviously.
cared about that kind of research and
Right.
trying to get your PhD. So I got my master's in physics and engineering science, and then I was going for my PhD again, and mostly I was playing solitaire. And I wasn't even very good at that. And I was just like, no, all I wanted to do was teach. That I really do love physics. I love understanding how the world works.
Yeah.
And it seems like it makes you a magician.
Yes.
You know that feeling?
Yes, absolutely. There are parts of engineering that even us engineers consider black magic. You know, if you're designing RF stuff, like high frequency RF stuff, that's deemed to be black magic by many people.
It
You know,
really
it's like,
is.
yeah. And I'm sure
Yes,
the same exists in the physics world and stuff like, oh, you're working on quantum. Oh, that's just black magic stuff, you know? Like,
Well, but even the simple stuff, I feel like it's almost magical. We have this museum in San Francisco called the Exploratorium.
I've been there.
and
It's awesome. Yeah.
Isn't it awesome?
It's great.
grew
I would
up
love to
there.
take my kids there, but yeah, it's a long way from Sydney.
It's a long way. But yeah, I just loved not only just playing with it, but things not reacting the way I'm expecting.
Yes.
And then you open up the thing and it says, this is why, this is the rules, this is what's going on. And I'm like,
Yep.
yes. So I thought, oh, I'll become a teacher. I became a high school teacher, which I mostly really liked.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of, I describe it as sort of like getting your band together at a local bar with like the gates where people throw beer things at you. Like,
Yeah, right. That's the best
When we do
analogy
well.
of being a high school teacher I've ever heard. That is, yep.
it's like when you do well, it's great, but they'll out and out tell you like
Yeah.
you're boring as hell and like anything you do. And I'm like,
Oh,
have some no, okay, there you go.
and now you've come to YouTube where it's multiplied by 100,000 people.
Yeah,
or are your comments relatively good compared to?
I feel like the majority of my comments, the majority of the people who watch my videos have been amazingly nice.
Excellent.
And when it got more popular, the amount of nice comments increased. Also, the
Ooh.
amount of complaining increased. It was very weird.
Yeah, it's a bell curve. Once your channel gets bigger, the outlier nutcases, there's just more outlier nutcases. Whereas if you're a small channel, it's down, like you don't even see it because they're just like, you might get one maybe if you're unlucky, but yeah.
Right. Usually the complaints are I use my hands when I speak and I blink or too much. Sometimes I've seen people like complaining about my lack of makeup, which I'm like,
what?
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Because, yeah, but mostly,
it's YouTube.
and it's YouTube, but also simultaneously, I feel like, so I was a teacher. I had some children. I had a child. They let me teach part-time. I had my second child. They got a new principal. They didn't let me come back unless I was going to teach full-time. And I had two small children and was taking care of my mother. And I was just like, I'm going to try to write a book about. So my thought was I wanted to write a book about the history of electricity so that people who don't know anything about electricity can learn about it through its history. That was my motivation.
And it wasn't aimed at us engineers, because I think your majority of your audience are engineers. who are
Yes.
just, we love engineering, but we were never taught this stuff, right? There's not a single engineer who has been taught the history of it. There's just not one. We learned that, that Maxwell is named after, James Maxwell and Voltaire, and, we learned the association, but it's like 1 second. Yeah, it's named after this guy, and that's it.
I feel like we're leaving everyone blind.
Right.
Everyone's supposed to discover something new, but we've never been told the story of where new discoveries come from.
Yeah.
The only thing we hear is either it was an accident or it
right.
popped. Someone might say, oh, it popped into my head fully formed. And you're like, well, that's okay. One, I don't believe you.
No.
And two, even if I did believe you, what does that do for me? Nothing. It does mean nothing.
Yep.
And I feel like if I had known the history of science, I might have done better at doing original research.
Right. Okay.
In science.
Interesting.
I can't believe how much I've learned. I wasn't expecting to learn any physics.
Right.
I got to be honest.
Yeah. But you did. In the process of doing this, you learned more physics than what you were taught.
So, I mean, I cannot tell you how much I've learned.
Wow.
And I've never been a kind of person who could teach yourself anything.
Right.
I never thought I could teach myself anything. And then I realized that, if I come up to anything that is new to me, I just study where it came from, and suddenly they will tell me how it works. Because they told me how they invented it. And then that'll make it all make so much more sense.
Got it. Okay, so you have no history background, really?
No.
No, right.
Zero.
So it's purely coming from a physics background, and you just love the history of it. You found you love the history. You got so much out of it. And, right. So how long did it take you to write the book?
So, well, that's an interesting question. So...
it always is.
So what happened was I started writing this thing and I just kept on. First thing that happened was it turned into a bunch of linked short stories.
Okay.
Almost immediately, I realized that it was sort of a relay race.
Right.
Of one person coming up with some idea and inspiring the next person and inspiring the next person.
That's what I got out of the book, and that's what we'll get into, is that, it's, yes, it just but very slowly, as I'll get into. It all unfolded incredibly slowly, whereas these days it's incredibly fast-paced.
Exactly. That's why I was I debated about my first chapter, which is titled something like Small Beginnings, because I'm like, okay, this is a whole chapter, and basically they're rubbing things and having feathers move.
Yeah, exactly. That's the entire first chapter. It's great.
I hope it's
great.
interesting.
I know.
But simultaneously, it's not that fast. It takes a little while to get going.
So then it came together. The book thought, this is actually more of a book.
It kept on expanding, and I kept on putting parts in there that weren't... So my original rough draft covered not only the history of how electricity got in the house, but also the history of radio, a little bit of the history of quantum mechanics, a little bit of the history of lasers and semiconductors and cell phones.
That's not in there, is it? I've had a no. We'll talk about what's not in there later. Because that's probably more interesting than, that's as interesting as what's in there.
Well, so people say, so when I started the videos, I started with if you look in my videos, the first video I made is similar to the first section of the first chapter I made. So what I did is I took that first section and I made it into a little video. Yep. But then making it into a video turned into a way of editing it.
Yes.
It was like putting on a play in Poughkeepsie first, and you try it out, and then people say, you know what, you made a mistake here. And then I also found that I feel like on YouTube, when I'm doing history, I need a way to have people believe me.
Right.
And the only thing I can think of is to use original documentation. as
Yes.
much as possible.
Yes, absolutely.
So I will find old newspaper articles. So if someone says
Wow.
this person said this, I will show the original article
Oh,
where
awesome. Yep.
Edison is saying X, Y, Z, so that you have a feeling
Yep.
that you can believe me that he said
it's
this.
real, and it did actually happen. Like
Right.
here it is. It was published in the local newspaper, or whatever. It was published in the Physics Letters, or it was published in the Royal Society, or it was published in
whatever. And
Yeah.
so, especially later on, I mean, like the very beginning, there wasn't as much letters that were kept, so you're kind of limited.
Right.
But as I went on, I found that there was more and more original stuff I could get. And every time I did that, I found all these new cool things that other people ignored because they just got that clip and then they just repeated that same clip over and over and over again. Instead of going to the original, which often had so many juicy details that
Yes.
got dropped.
That's
And
great.
so it became an interactive experience, if sort of.
Yeah.
And also it expanded, everything expanded. And then I was like, I cannot publish a 1,000-page book.
Of course. Yeah. Well, it's already what, 380 or something?
Something like that. I've cut a, so, and then I thought, well, what was the original focus? And my original focus was teaching people how electricity got in the home and how
Yes.
how the electrical distribution system came to be from the very beginning to, I mean, I say like to modern day, but I'm totally
Right.
lying. It's
So yeah, and that's what because I was reading the book and I thought like, and then I was just before we were supposed to do this, I thought, oh, I better skim the rest of it as well. You know, I'm going through the chapters and I'm going, there's nothing here on Maxwell, and it's like Maxwell is like in engineering, like to us like Maxwell is the ultimate, you know, like everything must obey his laws, right? Everything must obey Maxwell's laws. And then I did a search in the PDF to try and find Maxwell, and he's only like mentioned like once, twice or something like that, and that's just, oh, somebody else referenced him. And I thought, and then I realized, tell me if I'm right, it was, you just, I think you just confirmed it, is that it was the history of how electricity gets, you know, how electricity was developed, not necessarily the mathematics and the physics behind it, because that could almost be a separate book, could it not? Or like I would think there's like two parallel histories here. There's ones that the more practical ones that are the discovering the electricity. Right. They're playing with feathers and charges repel each other and stuff. You know, frogs' legs. You know, dance and everything and all that sort of stuff. And AC and DC and basic stuff like that. But then there's the physicists and the mathematicians, which
right.
Maxwell was a mathematician, I think. And yeah, and there's that parallel thing, and they sort of, you know, there's the theoretical path and there's the practical path. Is that would that be correct? In some way?
No.
No. Okay. Right.
Close.
That was my theory.
But close.
Right.
I understand what you were saying. It's funny that you mentioned Maxwell because I am currently doing these videos on deep dive histories.
Yes, I've seen the Maxwell. Yeah, the Maxwell's equations ones, and I have to watch it like 5 times, I think, before I actually get it.
They're challenging. The one I did that was an overview of all 4. That is a hard. I was a little worried. I'm like, some of my viewers.
Or someone will pick you up. Someone will pick you up on something.
I usually make everything so that basically anyone can watch it, anyone can read it.
Yeah.
But the Maxwell video one, that one is for people who have, I mean, if you've never heard of derivatives and integrals, that one's going to be a challenge for you. There's no way around it. But so what I did, the book does have deep physics in it, but in terms of getting electricity in the house, Maxwell's equations had very little influence.
Right.
In terms of wireless, it was fundamental.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And my second book is called The Wireless Revolution.
Oh,
from
you
Sir
are working
Newton to Hedy Lamarr.
Oh.
And that one is going to have a lot of Maxwell's equations. I mean, it starts with Sir Isaac Newton taking a wooden stick, sticking in his eye and moving around and combining rainbows. And it's going to go into how they discovered infrared. And, I mean, because if you
Oh,
think about it,
great.
wireless,
Awesome.
all about light. So I actually did have a chapter in this book written all
Right.
about Faraday to Maxwell to Hertz
Got it.
and all of that. And I'm like, you know what? This one needs to go in the next book.
Got it. So
I
you
have
are
this-
working on this at the moment? It is.
Yes. Yes, sir.
What stage are we at?
I would say it's about 60% written.
Right. Excellent.
So
I knew there had to be a second book there. I knew it.
you want to hear something crazy, Dave?
What?
You want to know how many books I have semi-written?
Oh, God. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Tell me.
You want to make a guess?
5?
7?
Oh.
7.
7. That sounds like my unfinished projects list. Every engineer has a list of unfinished projects that are just like, I'm famous. On my channel, I designed this power supply, and I did like a 15-part series, and I never finished it. And I still get emails every day. When are you finishing the power supply series?
And you're like, shut up. I have too many things.
I just lost interest. I just know.
I'm not going to lose interest. I may end up multiplying. It's just, you know that thing they say that writers, you have to get rid of your favorite part? I'm like, sure, I'll get rid of my favorite part. I'm just putting that in another book. So yeah, I've got the wireless revolution. I got one on radioactivity, starting with the history of radio, history of discovering electrons, and then of course alpha, beta, and gamma. And then I get to talk about two of my favorite people, Ernest Rutherford and Marie Curie. So that's always fun. And then I'm going to do one on the history of quantum mechanics, focused on Max Planck, the patron saint of quantum mechanics.
You're going to own the market. You're going to own the market for historical. Because I went through a phase when I was in my early 20s, I think, where I would read biographies of famous physicists and stuff like that, you know. But there's never been one. Is there another book that goes through the history of like this and how the characters, you know, learned from each other and played off each other? Is there another one?
There are some books, but they all have a small problem in that they are always trying to tell a story that they think is interesting. They're not trying to teach the physics and the engineering.
Okay, right.
And I feel like when your plan is to tell an interesting story, then you just talk about the physics and engineering enough so that your audience will follow you.
Yeah.
And I feel like that creates a bit of a superficial book. And I feel like if you tell the story in order to teach the science and the history, the science and the engineering through the history, then the stories pop out. Each one becomes this exciting discovery because you're focused on the discovery, not the person.
Yep.
As much.
And that's what the biographies I read, they're all just focused on the one person. I go, but I want, you know, and they might mention the interaction with someone else, but I want to hear that story.
Right. Like, how does it go?
And they don't give it to me.
There are some books. There's a book by someone named Bill Bryson, who's a pretty famous author, and he wrote a book called A Short History of Nearly Everything.
I've heard good things about that. I've not read it yet. It's
a big book.
Right.
And I love Bill Bryson's writing. In fact, I told so many people that I am inspired by his writing style that when I gave a very rough copy to my relatives who asked for it, they went and they said, it's no Bill Bryson. I'm like, oh! So I learned my lesson.
Ouch.
Never give your rough draft of your book to my relatives.
Yep.
Never.
Oh my goodness.
It is not, it's a different kind of book. I feel good about how it was written. I'm not insulting myself. It just,
that's terrible.
And I'm planning on writing a book about the history of spectroscopy.
Oh, goodness.
And astronomy, looking at the lights from the stars to figure out what the stars are made of and how they're working.
Oh, awesome. Yep.
Fascinating. And a book on the history of trains, planes, and automobiles, which
Oh,
sounds
goodness.
really cool.
Oh, I've got an interest in trains as well. Come on. And aeroplanes as well. Oh, goodness. You're hitting all the time. Sign me up.
I'm thinking about writing a textbook that is history-based.
Ooh, okay. A lot more effort into a textbook, I would imagine.
I don't know.
How much effort goes into each one of your video? Like, because your video, are you still making the videos based on chapters of books and you're still doing that same process now?
Well, I got easily diverted, but I'm trying, once I'm done with my Maxwell's equations one, I'm going to go back to the parts that are in my next book.
Right.
Because I want them, I can't imagine writing a book without making YouTube videos that correspond with.
Got it. That is your process that you like and what works for you. And yep.
Exactly.
Excellent.
And so I already did videos on the history of radio. I want to include the stuff on Newton up to Faraday, and then I'm going to jump into the history of television.
Oh, fantastic.
And radar and stuff like that. So it's going to be, I have so many great ideas and not enough time. And we're asking me how much time I put into these. It's unbelievable.
I can imagine. Well, okay, I will give you an idea, right? A YouTuber like me who's just off the cuff, I don't write scripts, never written scripts. I just press the camera, I just turn on the camera and start yapping and then edit something and something magically comes together. So basically, if I can't shoot and edit a video in one day, I'm generally not going to start it. I'm not even going to bother starting it. And then there's other more polished engineering YouTubers who'll take, they write scripts and then it'll be nice, polished, produced content and voiceover work and, even animations and stuff. And that'll take them typically 30 hours for a video. So they'll spend like a working week on one video. Whereas I don't think I've ever spent, in my 1,500 videos, I've never spent a working week on a video before. So what would be your rough time frame on a video?
I don't know, 150 hours?
Yeah, that's what I figured.
It takes me about 1 to 3 weeks to write the script.
Ooh, wow. But you're essentially writing a chapter as well. So
I'm
it's
writing
kind
a
of
section of a chapter of a book.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I'm not writing a section of a chapter of a book, as far as I can tell, because I've just decided, I decided to try to tackle the history of Maxwell's equations in real depth.
Yep.
And I wasn't sure when I started what I would do with it, because I don't want to put that much depth into a book that covers as much material as wireless. I mean, I want to talk about it with some depth. It's important to me.
Maybe you could use some of it, but maybe chop out some, but then the art is knowing what to chop out. And that'd be painful. Well, as someone who produces long form videos, who never chop, all my criticism is, Dave, you don't edit enough, you don't chop enough stuff out. But there's one part that might be interesting to someone, so I can't.
Right. The editing part, I've been through a lot of editors because it's challenging. It's not just getting your words polished, but deciding what to include and what not to include, and how you put it together is a challenge. But some of it is that it takes me, like I said, 1 to 3 weeks to write the script, and then it takes me about a week to add all the images, which usually ends up being an editing process in itself. Like I start adding images, I realize new things, I change it again, I change it the third time. And then I film it, and then it usually takes me a couple days after that to edit
to edit the video and get it up. And oh my goodness.
And it's weird also, because this is a me, myself, and I production. Like, I hired someone to work on my website, and there are people who formatted my book and made the cover, and I hired people, and one person generously just was my editor for a while because he liked my videos, which was incredible. But I mean, so I've done editing. I mean, I've definitely had help. But the funny thing about the YouTube videos is it's almost always just me and my work. So
Yep, that's it. Join the club. Well, can we talk about maybe the book in more detail now? Because we talked about how your process and so it's, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it basically starts in the 1600s with where they discovered electric charges and things repel. Charges repel and stuff like that. So just people playing around with experimenting with these new charge things that they didn't know about.
I think were very important.
Yep.
Yes.
And one term I love from it is they thought, what's this electricity thing? And they called it electric virtue.
Yes.
And I just love that term, electric virtue.
Electric virtue and electric fire.
So who came up with that term? Was that Stephen Gray?
I don't think
Electric
so.
virtue?
I'm not sure who came up with electric virtue.
Right.
Or electric fire. They were all over the place. What was fascinating to me, I don't know if you've gotten into the second chapter where it starts to become a party.
Yes,
But
the parties, yes.
In the 1700s, the electricity was more of a thing to do to show you were cultured.
Right.
It was especially in France, if you wanted to do well at Versailles, you needed to be witty and know poems and be able to electrify pretty girls and give them electric kisses and write bad poetry about it. That's how you made it up in the world. Right. And the royalty, especially in France, had this idea that they would show that they were worthy of being royalty by showing that they were smart and cultured. There was a lot of philosophy debates and a lot of just doing crazy electricity experiments
because
all the time.
Because that was the fad. Was it a fad? Was it a fad?
It was totally a fad. It was a fad, and it was just the popular thing to do because they invented a static electricity machine. And with this machine and the jar with metal on the inside and outside, you could give really big shocks and you could, light things on fire and you could kill small birds. And they were like, this is the best. We have no Netflix. There's not much to do, but man, we can electrify things and it is fun. Oh. And they were totally fearless. That was the other thing that just occurred to me, of course they were fearless. The chances of dying from science were so much less than the chances of dying from
basically everything back then.
Everything.
What didn't kill you back then? If you lived to 40, you were doing well,
Doing great. So there was definitely this sort of ooh, this seems dangerous and exciting. Let's try it more. I mean, there's this great story about Benjamin Franklin. He writes this note about how he wrote this note about how he's so excited. His friends all come in crowds to see it. He's never had so much fun in his life. And then he writes this note about how he wants to do one last electric party of delight, I think is what he called it. And they kill a turkey with electricity, and then they roast it with electricity, and then they have little cups where give themselves electric shocks when they drink it, and then they give toast to the electricians of the world.
Is that what they were called back then? Electricians?
No, he made up that word in that letter.
Right, he invented the term electrician.
Let's give toast to the electricians of Europe, I think. And that created the word electrician. Right. There you go. And he also said he fired off a cannon of electric battery of cannons. And after that, everyone started saying if you had something super powerful, they called it a battery.
Oh.
I'm giving away some of the secrets.
A gun battery. Really?
Yes.
There you go.
And when Volta published his description of his battery in 1800, the first electric battery, he didn't call it a battery. He called it an artificial electric organ.
Oh, okay.
And nobody wanted to call it that.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yep. I've seen that time and time again in the history of this sort of stuff over the years, is that somebody called it something and everyone just went, that's rubbish. And I don't know, the community come up with another, or the next person to publish like
Right.
derivative research calls it something else. Was that
And
common?
that one's, it's a mix. It's funny to me to read things and people are like, what do you think about calling this positive and negative? And you're like, that's what the thought you put in there? What the heck? It's amazing to see them just like write notes like, hey, what do you think about calling it this? And then suddenly we're stuck with calling them cathodes and anodes. That's Faraday's fault. Faraday knew no other languages but English. He had no education and knew no math.
Right. Yep.
So when he was discovering all this stuff with electricity, he contacted a linguist and he said, can you help me name all these things?
Right.
And they're like, okay, cathode, anode, ion.
Really? Wow.
Like, I would say 60% of the words that you use in your job comes from Faraday's friend.
Wow.
He's just like,
wow.
Dielectric. Oh yeah. He came up with the dielectric, the idea of the dielectric, how you measure the dielectric constant. All of that was Faraday. It was just amazing.
So did his linguist friend just invent these words, or did they come from Latin? Yeah. Did they translate from Latin?
I think they came from Latin or Greek. They had, I don't know Latin or Greek either. But he sort of described it to his friend, and his friend said, okay, well,
there's this Latin word that kind of sounds like it.
Like that. Yeah, exactly. But my thought was, because I wanted to teach people how electricity works, I wanted to start at the beginning and sort of go step by step, because I think most people, when they talk about it, they do the War of the Currents, but they start in like 1880.
Yeah, which is 200 years. After when all this sort of stuff started happening. I think it's in the first chapter, or started. You mentioned that it was 60 years before they discovered that charges repelled. They knew they attract, or is it opposite? They knew they attracted, but it took 60 years before somebody discovered that they also repelled. What?
Well, not very many people were playing with electrics, as they called them.
Yep.
Because they weren't that interesting to them. They didn't think there was much there. There was some Italians who might have discovered it beforehand, but then it was more in retrospect. They're like, well, they kind of noticed it repel, but they thought the thing was making vortexes, so not really.
So there just weren't enough nerdy people to be interested in this stuff. Like at a deeper level going, oh, I wonder if it also does this.
I think it's not the people, it's the system to promote their ideas. If you have a place where people can get published and other people can listen to them and they can get some money from it in some way or another, university, Royal Society, a king or queen or whatever, then you end up with the discoveries. If you don't have that, you can have as many nerdy people as you want. If they can't publish it anywhere, they can't read where it comes from, and they don't have the money to do the research. And it doesn't have to be like, it's not always like, you were mentioning this guy named Stephen Gray, who discovered that electricity moves. And that there's conductors,
which is basically current flow, right? But that came a long time after. That they didn't know about current as such back then. But charges move. Yes.
And he discovered induction, static induction.
Yes, not static induction as well. Technically in induction, but not magnetic induction as we
Right.
you know.
And that's why Faraday called it magnetoelectric induction,
Ah,
because it was a term already in use from Stephen Gray. Actually, it was from
yeah.
um, I can't say this guy's name. Isaac Newton's second assistant,
Oh, geez, yeah,
Anyway,
yeah. I know. I
I
can't.
can't say his
No,
name very
I'll
well.
butcher it as well.
My,
Yep.
anyway. I apologize, but the thing is, I mean, like, he was a clothing dyer, and he had a bad back. But his friends convinced the government to give him a little bit of money so that he could be at a retirement home for deserving soldiers. And that's how he had enough time to make his discovery.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like they paid him big bucks or anything.
No,
It just
but at least you got something. You got something for it. You got some
something.
recognition, and you got, you know.
Right, exactly. So that is my theory, is that in order for things to be discovered, it's not that you need the nerdy people, plenty of nerdy people. You need the system set up. And any country where the king or queen sets up some Royal Society of Science,
Yeah.
their country does better.
That has to be demonstrably true. I don't think anyone would dispute that at all.
I mean, at least that's my theory from
I
reading
think that's
everything.
absolutely correct. It has to be. It has to be that. Who was it at the Royal Society that prevented another guy? He was president.
Newton. Isaac Newton.
Yes, Newton. They made Newton the president of the Royal Society, and then one of his guys he didn't like, one of the fellow nerdy people he didn't like, he prevented him from being published. So it was like, it just shut him out.
I think we think of science as this sort of lofty thing full of lofty ideas, and people with very, mature and adults with white jacket, and everyone's very
fancy
serious
and
right. And they were people. Some were delightful and some were jerks, and most were in between. And I feel like it's been so much fun meeting them. If that doesn't sound too
No, that's
delusional.
I totally understand. Yeah. People feel like they know me. People feel like they know you because they've watched your videos, and they feel like they, I get, dozens of pages of emails from somebody who, who watches one of my videos, and they tell me their whole life story, and they tell me how, connected we are, and it's like, wow,
Right. And sometimes it's beautiful and sometimes it's a little creepy.
It's a bit creepy, yeah.
But no, I think that, and I feel like I feel like I bumped into something that's important. That it's not, learning where things come from is not just a good way to help people who know nothing about it understand a little bit about it, but also it's even more helpful for those of us who know more about it. Like, the more you know about a subject, the more you get from learning its history.
Absolutely.
Because you learn all these intricacies of what it means and what it does. And I definitely feel like, for example, radio waves. If you asked me 5 years ago about radio waves, I could have answered you.
Yeah,
I would have felt like
you would have given the standard engineering answer. You would have,
Right, but I didn't have a solid understanding of it until I studied the people who discovered it.
Interesting.
And then it felt different to me.
Right.
It means something different to me,
Yep.
And so I think that's true for all of science. And occasionally I get into things that I have zero knowledge of. Because, as you see, I go all over the place.
It's absolutely. Well, I'm reading your book, I'm getting a similar sort of thing. It's like, more like I'm getting more of a passion for that particular thing. Not necessarily that I'm learning more engineering from your book, but I'm getting more passionate about, well, I haven't gotten into the detailed later chapters. I'm sure there's more in there.
I don't know. Have you gotten even to the Leyden jar?
No, I haven't gotten to the Leyden jar yet. I just get the shocking. It's 2.2. I'm at like 2.1. Here it is. Here, I know.
Leyden jar is coming. Leyden jar is coming.
And
I
it's
love
just,
the Lightning
it's
Tamers.
so great. But yeah, I feel like my passion for that sort of stuff is being ignited, and it will encourage me to learn, to go into the, oh yeah, I'm want to check out Maxwell's equations, because I watched your video or something. I want to get into it more, that's just stuff I've totally forgotten, right? You had to learn it back then, and you don't use it
Right.
every day, right? No, we use just basic stuff every day. It's just, more as a practical engineer, you just, you don't need the detailed maths and the physics behind it.
No,
It's,
no.
yeah, it's very different. So it ignited the passion more than,
Oh, that's.
which is really good.
I feel like they've ignited the passion. Do you see what I mean? I feel like
So you're telling of their story.
I feel like they're sort of talking to me from the past if it's not too
No,
woo-woo
that's
science
that's
above it.
that's that's not too
And
cringy, no.
they want me to tell their stories.
Yep.
They want me to tell their science.
Right.
They want to tell, like, where it came from and what it means to them.
Mm-hmm.
And by telling that story, it's so inspiring that suddenly you're like, wow, that's cool. I never thought about that. Maybe I could try this thing. Maybe I could do this experiment. I don't know. I think it's treating them as human beings that are not perfect and sometimes try to mess each other up and sometimes steal from each other and sometimes.
Oh, yeah, totally.
It makes it real and it makes you realize that you can contribute too.
Got
You
it.
see what I mean?
Yep.
These weren't perfect people who had their ideas. They were, messy and they just threw stuff on the wall and saw what stuck.
Who would you
Sometimes literally.
consider the geniuses, though? Who, everyone says, oh, it's Maxwell, it's Tesla, and other, get the genius label. Because a whole bunch of them weren't geniuses in that they invented new mathematical concepts and stuff like that. They were just like playing around with stuff, just like they were just experimentalists, and they discovered this and they just followed, what things did, but they didn't invent theories and stuff like that. Is a genius label something that you even like?
No, not particularly. No. But I do think that the most important person in electricity is Michael Faraday.
Yeah, that'd be hard to argue. In electricity or in, that's hard to.
Everything.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things can be brought straight back to Faraday. For example, you say Maxwell, and Maxwell was amazing.
But
when Maxwell
derived from Faraday, right?
Right. In fact, Maxwell specifically said, I am making Faraday's ideas mathematical. So, there came, I think it's hard to see. I think, for example, the idea of magnetic lines of force and even more importantly, electric lines of force. So in 1837, Faraday was recreating an experiment by Charles Augustin Coulomb, who found all the charges were on the surface of a metal container. And Faraday's like, let's make it bigger. So he just builds this giant cage.
Yeah.
And he goes inside the cage. And he not only has them putting charges on the outside, he also has them doing experiments on the outside. And then he finds that no matter what, on the inside, he's protected by the Faraday cage.
Yes.
And because of this, he comes up with the idea that everything electrical comes up with these curved lines of force that come from them. And that they induce non-conductive materials, which he called dielectrics after asking his friend what he called them. And then he came up with the dielectric constant, how to measure the dielectric constant. But the other thing was, everyone thought that was the stupidest idea that they had ever heard.
Really?
Who
thought it was stupid? Can we name names?
Everyone. Everyone. At first, everyone thought it. And the reason I know that is not only have I seen letters to the editor, open letters like, "Dear Mr. Faraday." They're always super nice too. They would start off with, "Dear Professor Faraday, you know I hold you in the highest esteem, and I would never complain about anything. But here is my 12-page paper on why you stink, and this is terrible. Don't do it." The other reason I know it was not well liked is because when Heinrich Hertz's papers were published, so Faraday comes up with these ideas. He also comes up with the idea that it takes a while for these lines of force to move in space, and therefore you could make waves of them in the air.
Right.
And then he comes up with the idea that maybe light is a wave of these lines of force.
That's genius level. Come on.
That is that is not only genius level. Yeah, you can use the word genius.
Yeah.
But also that is such an odd view of reality. I mean, we now agree with it.
Yeah.
But if you look back on it and you say, well, that's just weird, right?
Well, isn't the quote, you know, what I butcher in the quote, but isn't like history's written by the winners, like the ones who just happen to be right? I mean, how many, you know, like, were there better ideas at the time that just turned out to be wrong? Like everyone thought, oh yeah, this has to be the go-to right answer, but Faraday happened to be right. I mean,
well, I think there were other theories about what was going on, and it was just that they were happy with.
Right.
But and in fact, if you see what in 1845 when Faraday came up with this crazy idea, it was actually only because he had to give a talk at the last moment. So Faraday was supposed to introduce the talk for someone else.
Right.
And the other person chickened out and ran out the back door.
Name names? Is that person named?
Oh, that was Bridgestone. Like not what do you call it? The bridge. Wheatstone Bridge. Yeah. Yes. That was Wheatstone of Wheatstone Bridge.
I don't know his first name. What's his I can't remember his first name. Wheatstone. Oh God.
I don't know. It's in there somewhere. It'll come back.
I'm sure I've done a video on it. Yeah. Wheatstone.
So anyway, Wheatstone chickens out. So Faraday's there, and Faraday was a hyper organized person. Right. It's funny that I admire him so much because we're diametric opposites. I can do math and completely disorganized. He couldn't do math at all. Right. And more. I mean, like he wrote his papers and every paragraph was numbered for 27 papers in a row. Oh. And he would just refer according to paragraph 72. And you're like, what? And all his notebooks. Every paragraph in his notebook was numbered.
Wow.
So he could go to each, I mean, not just the page, but each paragraph was numbered. And they kept all of these notebooks. It's astonishing. So anyway, but he would never have given the talk without being prepared if this hadn't happened. And he literally practiced how to give a talk and would have a little card that said slow to remind him to slow down, which I tried and did not work for me.
Totally wouldn't work for me.
I know. But anyway, so he giving this talk and he suddenly, and afterwards people said it was so astonishing. They asked him to write it up, which is why he wrote this up. And it's like 3 pages long. And it starts off with, basically, forgive me for my ramblings. I have no idea if I'm correct. Often you have an idea and then you look at it later and you're like, nope. And he was basically, the whole thing, half of it is like, please forgive me, this might be full of it.
Right.
And then he says, okay, you have one thing. If you have one charge or magnet vibrating, then you can imagine the other one vibrating. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what light is.
Right. Wow. What an insight.
And it's just like, and then of course, Maxwell writes his equations to make Faraday's ideas mathematical.
Right. I've seen part of your video on Maxwell's equations and how he sort of massages them he sort of translates them in different ways to make them mathematical, to make the physical mathematical or whatever, something like that. Am I right?
Yeah, he did a model with like tubes of liquid
Yeah.
and then he's like, well, that doesn't work well, but some other guy has a theory where like I can model atoms as like a nucleus with an electric atmosphere. I'm like, wow, you're really on the money. And so they used that. And then, but yeah, it all came together. And then after Maxwell's equations, there was a German physicist, his name, once again, like Wheatstone's first name,
Right.
is somewhere. And he was in charge of this contest. And he said, I will give 100 ducats or whatever that is for the person who experimentally proves Maxwell's equation.
Oh.
And he goes to his student and he says, you're a bright young lad, Heinrich Hertz. You should do.
Kind of know
And
that
Hertz,
name. Yep.
It goes, no, that's too hard. Nope. 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 Nope.
Hertz turned it down.
Young
Hertzian.
Hertz turned it down.
Yep.
But then years later, when he came up with the way of measuring radio waves, he wrote a letter to his boss, Helmholtz. I think that was Helmholtz.
Oh,
and he says,
Helmholtz.
Yes.
Oh, as in Helmholtz resonance. Okay. Yes.
Yes.
That's how I pronounce it anyway. Helmholtz.
I think
I'm probably butchering it, but that's how it's pronounced here in Australia.
I'm gonna go with that. Maybe I'm part Australian.
Okay.
Right. So he writes him and he says, I'm sorry to bother you, but I think this was an idea you had before. And he sends back a postcard that says, bravo, publish it today.
Oh,
and
awesome.
that's why radio waves were discovered.
Wow.
So if you
weren't the people who believed in Hertz called Hertzians? Am I wrong? Am I totally getting that wrong? I have a vague recollection. This is not from your book, but from somewhere else.
They were called Hertzian waves.
Oh,
but it was
okay.
more
Maybe
the
that's what. Yeah.
Who believed in Maxwell were called Maxwellians.
Maxwellians. Okay.
So that was a common thing because after Maxwell published his stuff, there was a lot of conflict with it because nobody kind of knew what to do with it.
Right.
But then when Hertz discovered radio waves, suddenly everyone got on the Maxwell laws bandwagon, so to speak.
Yep. So who was after Maxwell? Like who took that and expanded, or was that the be all end all?
Oh, well, there's two ways. You can either talk about how Maxwell's equations turned into like the modern form of it, like the math of it.
Yeah.
And that was a guy named Oliver Heaviside.
Yeah.
And Heinrich Hertz. Actually, Heinrich Hertz published a paper in 1890, a few years after his discovery of radio waves, on the math of Maxwell's equations. And in it, he says, I see that this guy named Oliver Heaviside has done very similar things, but I still think it's worthwhile to publish my stuff.
Right.
And then everyone was like, everyone loved Hertz because he discovered radio waves.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, everyone listened to Oliver Heaviside. And in fact, a bunch of people called it the Heaviside-Hertz equations, including Einstein, who used those equations to come up with relativity and E equals mc squared.
Yes.
So,
can we talk about Einstein for a minute? Because I don't. Have you written anything on Einstein? Oh, you have. Okay, right, cool. Because I've read quite a few. I've read 2 biographies, I think, on Einstein, a couple of biographies. This is way back, and a couple of other things on it. And apparently, anyone could have discovered what Einstein discovered, like maybe up to 100 years, like 50 years earlier or something. But apparently, anyone could have put 2 and 2 together. But he just happened to be the first to put 2 and 2 together.
Well,
maybe I'm butchering. I'm totally butchering the history of that.
The thing that I find fascinating about Einstein is that he had sort of 2 major influences, and they would crisscross each other.
Mm-hmm.
One, and both of which basically started in 1905, his miracle year.
Yes.
In 1905, he publishes 4 papers.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is an experiment you can do to verify that atoms exist and Brownian motion.
That's the one he won the Nobel Prize for, technically.
No.
No.
He won it for photoelectric effect.
Oh, photoelectric effect. Right.
The next one was one that he said was radical, or what did he say? Something like it was, he thought that it was radical. I agree with him. It was 5 years earlier, Max Planck or Max Planck. I always feel weird saying Planck. I feel like I'm faking the name. But I think that's how you say it if you're German. Yep. Anyway, Planck came up with this idea that he could model an experiment of how much heat certain objects gave, called the black body radiation problem. But he had this great model, Planck did. And everyone was like super excited about his model. He was super happy, and he'd worked on it for a really, really long time. And then someone came to him, his friend came to him and said, I've just done a new experiment at high frequency and it doesn't work.
Oh.
And he's like, no! So he makes up a formula that fits the curve like that. But the problem is he had no theoretical backing for it. It was just like, this works with the data my friend has.
Right.
And then he was like petrified. The thing about Planck is later in his life, he wrote a short scientific autobiography, which I highly recommend. Mm-hmm. It's like 40 pages long, which is just the length I like. And he's hilarious. He is very warm and funny and understandable. You're like, oh, this is what he did and this is why I did it. So anyway, he was like, oh my gosh, I'm so stuck. I'm going to have to do something I hate. And what he hated was the idea of statistical mechanics with the laws of thermodynamics.
Oh.
Which is, he was like, he loved the laws of thermodynamics, the first 2 laws. He didn't have the third one yet. He loved that energy was conserved and entropy in a closed system can only increase. He thought that was great. But Maxwell and Boltzmann and an American named Gibbs had this other idea. They're like, there's too many molecules everywhere. We have to model it with statistics. And he said, Maxwell said it, I love this line. He said something like, it changes, yes, it makes that the law, the second law isn't as much a law as a statistical certainty.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
And he said, it's like throwing a cup of tea into the ocean and getting it back again.
Right. But I almost, a law and a statistical certainty, kind of like the same thing. They are pretty much equivalent, aren't they? It's like, like,
but
one just takes longer. One just takes longer to happen. Is that? Yeah.
That's sort of what the idea. But Planck didn't like that. But he was desperate. So he's like, fine, I'll use it. Don't make me, but okay, fine, I'll use it. But then the problem is if he did that, he had to put some limit on the energy. Otherwise, he would have infinite energy with his problem.
Right.
So he said, okay, what if the energy was only produced in these little energy packets where it's a constant, h times the frequency of the light.
Right.
Bingo. And he didn't think it was that important. He was mostly happy with coming up with what's called Boltzmann's law, which he came up with it.
Oh, it's Stefan Boltzmann's law, isn't it?
No, I think first name is Wolfgang Boltzmann. Now I'm confused.
Yeah, but it's Stefan Boltzmann. So there's another dude called Stefan.
Maybe,
or is that a different variant of the law?
I think that might be a different law.
Right. Okay.
But anyway, for the entropy, there's a law with the log and all that stuff. So he does that in 1900. And the world goes, okay, fine. That's fine. I don't really care. And then in 1905, Einstein had the crazy idea to take him literally.
Right.
He says, I think this is not a math trick. I think this is real.
This is a
I think-
fundamental part of the universe.
Right. I think light is created, moved, absorbed, all at these quanta, all in these, and that would explain certain things, like the photoelectric effect can be explained this way.
Which he came up with. He came up with the photoelectric effect first, and then
Hertz did.
Oh, Hertz. Okay. Right.
Hertz discovered the photoelectric effect because he was playing with radio waves, and it was really hard to see. See, he had an antenna, a generator generating the radio wave, and he had a little receiver, which was a ring with a little gap in it. And he tried to make the spark from the initial part seen in the other thing, but it was really hard because it was tiny. He said he had to be in the dark. His eyes had to relax. It was just tiny. So he's like, okay, I'll put a box around the spark gap generator so the light from that won't mess me up.
Right.
But when he put a box there, he couldn't see it anymore. It's like, oh man, I guess it blocked the wave. So he removed it. But then he's like, I wonder if it'll work with glass. So he put glass there. It blocked it too. And then he put quartz there and it didn't block it. And he's like, there's energy in the ultraviolet because ultraviolet can make it through quartz, but it can't make it through.
Right. So that's why he associated it with light. And that's
right.
Right. Okay. With different frequencies of light.
Right. Yeah. And what he was showing was that there was energy at the high frequencies that you didn't get the lower frequencies, even if it's very bright. And then his grad student, a guy named Philip Leonard, starts playing with it, and he does more experiments. So if you look at Einstein's paper, he says, this correlates to Philip Leonard's work.
Oh, okay, because I've never heard of Leonard before.
Most people don't like to talk about him because he became a huge Nazi.
Oh, okay. Huge. Right. Oh, yes.
Like
that's
leader of the Nazi scientists. So,
oh, wow.
And because he was sort of the scientist who discovered everything right before it got big, if that makes any sense.
He was erased from history.
Basically.
So to speak. Right.
I'm not going to cry a ton about it, but at the same token.
Right.
He did do important things. And people do mention him, but they just like, this guy named Philip Leonard did it. And on we go.
Now on we go. Right. Yeah. Okay.
That idea of Einstein's could not have been done before 1900.
Okay, interesting. All right, so that blows my theory
because he was reacting to Planck's ideas.
Right, okay.
And also created quantum mechanics.
Yes.
We don't think. But then the next two papers were on relativity.
Mm-hmm.
And then on E equals mc squared. And that, okay, let me backtrack. Maxwell, when he wrote Faraday, when he came up with the idea that light was an electromagnetic wave, he said that can get rid of the ether.
Right.
He said, I'm going to keep the vibrations, drop the ether. Maxwell, when he made his equations mathematical, he said, you need the ether, he thought. Right. And because the people who liked Maxwell started to look for proof of the ether.
Yep.
It became part of the Maxwellian club thing.
Right.
Like if you're a Maxwellian, you're going to look for ether. And then they came up with they did these experiments, but it didn't show an ether.
Right.
So then they came up with these equations for how the ether twists things. They're called Lorentz equation.
Oh, okay. Yep. Lorentz forces.
Right. The Lorentz forces, there's also Lorentz contractions. So when Einstein wrote his equation in 1905 for relativity, he was just saying you can get to those equations by saying the speed of light is the speed limit.
Right.
You don't need. It wasn't saying you have to get rid of the ether. It says you don't need it.
Yes.
So it was, I think that Einstein is often he got so popular with people who didn't really, but he was actually highly influential. I was shocked. There's actually a book called Einstein and the Quantum by a guy named Stone. I can't remember his first name.
Right.
And that is follow a whole bunch of people through the history of science for quantum mechanics. Fabulous book. Fabulous book. I love that book. Douglas Stone. Now I remember the guy's name.
Okay.
And I hope he doesn't see this. I dislike his subtitle.
What's his subtitle? Tell us.
His subtitle was something of the Valiant Swabian.
What is that? I don't even know what that means.
I had to look it up. A Swabian is someone from a certain area of Germany, which I guess Einstein was from. And occasionally Einstein would call himself a Valiant Swabian when he was writing to his girlfriend / first cousin / second cousin. But like absolutely everything else in this book I adore, except for the subtitle.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Oh,
so
this is great.
Let's go.
Oh, this is great. We are over our time limit, but I don't care.
Oh,
because I am wearing the shirt. I don't know if you noticed.
Tesla Edison.
In the theme of AC/DC, as in the band
right,
Akadaka.
exactly.
AC, the Current Wars. I am totally ashamed. I have not seen the movie yet, The Current Wars. I am totally ashamed.
It is.
Your opinion. Give us your opinion as the history person on electricity. Okay.
First, I have to caveat it. When my father was a lawyer, and when we used to watch movies with law in it, he would yell at the TV.
Yeah.
No, objection, leading the witness. No. I am like that with the history of science movies.
Mm-hmm.
The War of the Currents movie is beautiful. I love many of the actors in it. It's basically very far from reality.
Right.
It's just,
but
like,
is it near enough to be kind of sort of there, or is it just so far out there that, oh God, no, it's just like...
Well, I mean, it's hard for me to tell because I feel the same way. There was a movie called Radioactive about Marie Curie, which I couldn't even, which beautiful, great actors.
Yep.
And it looked just right. I mean, like, whoever's doing the set direction for those things has got it. But I feel like when you tell a false story that is kind of like the real story, it is more harmful than telling a completely false story.
Right.
Like, if you watch The Prestige, and there's Nikola Tesla.
Yep. Yeah, I know. It's like...
making copies of hats. And
I know.
But at the same time,
I know.
like, you can say, no, that is not true.
I know. I just watched it the other month and I'm just going, no.
Yeah, exactly. But you can say, like, this is complete fantasy movie. And you can sort of back off and say, okay, I feel like I feel like when it's close to the truth but not actually the truth, it's sometimes when it's the most harmful.
Okay.
And I think that's particularly true because there's enough truth to it, you believe all of it.
Right. So you think it's harmful from a historical point of view. Okay. All right.
From a scientific point of view. I feel very mixed about Tesla because he is so inspiring. His devices are so inspiring. That I call a Tesla coil the gateway drug for engineers.
Yeah. Right.
I mean,
yeah.
Like, how many electrical engineers do you know with Tesla coils in their basement?
Yeah.
Like 80%, 90%? I mean, come on. There is something magically beautiful about these things.
Yep,
And
totally agree.
anything that gets people inspired by science, I'm just
Yeah,
like,
it's good.
yay!
Yep.
But also there's this myth of a person who invented everything all by themselves
Yeah.
with no help, and everything was perfect, and not acknowledging anyone else's contributions. And that they know the true science, and the scientists are trying to keep you from knowing the truth. And I'm
Truth
like,
and
no,
all that.
science
Yeah.
is a model. Sometimes we go back to old models and we say, hey, that's a good idea. And sometimes we go, we're dropping this model that's 300 years old because it stinks. We have a better one. And so when it comes to Tesla, it's such I'm so conflicted, because the more I study, the
It's
more
a
I'm impressed.
polarizing issue. Ha! I'm here all week.
Polarizing
I'm here
issue.
all week.
Exactly. So I feel very,
Yeah.
and I think that sometimes I upset people because but part of it is that I studied not only the history of electricity from very early on, but also the history of radio and wireless, and the history of quantum mechanics. And so, like, most people, when they talk about Tesla, they're like, oh, he did really great things with this. And you're like, yeah, no, you just, he invented X-rays.
Right.
I'm like,
wow.
No,
No,
he didn't.
Oh, okay.
No.
I was going to say, right. I didn't know that.
He told people he made an X-ray light bulb. When the X-ray was invented or discovered, they found that X-rays would make fluorescence glow. And Edison was like, I'm going to find a fluorescent that glows really well, put it around an X-ray machine, and make a light bulb.
Right.
Great idea. And I'm like, no, don't do it. But they didn't know X-rays are dangerous, right?
They didn't know at the time. That's right. Yeah.
So he gets his muckers, as he called them, to try every chemical they can find, and they create a sheet of phosphorescence that glows really well. Sell it to doctors. They put it in, put in shoe stores so people can play around with getting an X-ray machine while they see if their shoe fits.
Yep.
All sorts of things. And then he patents an X-ray light bulb. And then he starts to get hurt by these. And he's like, I'm scared by this. But at the same time he is patenting this light bulb, Tesla comes out and says, I have a light bulb too. And they have a little conflict about it. Nothing comes from Tesla's. And Edison gets freaked out because his eye gets hurt. And then his assistant loses one arm and then the other arm and then dies.
Oh.
So,
yeah.
And he's like, I'm not touching this thing at all. But I think we have this desire to make scientists all good. And if they aren't all good, we're like, oh, all their science was bad. So I hear a lot of people like, oh, I hate Edison because of the dog experiments. So he never invented anything. I'm like, well, that's not how inventions work. We don't love every It's not like the people you like always do the best things, and the people you don't like don't do anything.
That's it. Can you talk about the Tesla Edison thing, right? Edison is, to my mind, known as the experimentalist. Like, he sucked at maths, he didn't know what he was doing, and he just, like, his lab, he would literally try things, 1,000 different chemicals until one worked, and haha, look, aren't I a genius? And whereas Tesla was more mathematical focused. Would that be a semi-correct summation?
Sort of. I think that there was a guy named Steinmetz, Charles Steinmetz, and Charles Steinmetz was the mathematician. He actually started as a mathematician. Steinmetz is fascinating. I love Steinmetz.
I don't think I've heard of him. Unless it doesn't ring a bell.
He figured out hysteresis in transformers.
Oh,
and he
really?
figured out the what's it called, when you're doing stuff with AC in 3 phases. and you do it, phasers, I think it's called.
Oh, the phaser diagrams and phasers, like,
Yeah, he
oh,
came up with
he came up
phasers,
with that. Oh, okay, wow, wow,
and he
that's a big deal.
also yeah, oh my gosh. He was actually far more influential. And he insisted that electrical engineers in school should take other classes besides electrical engineering,
Like,
s- like English, history,
right, okay,
stuff like that.
right.
And so when you were in school, you were like, oh, I like taking all these subjects, you can say thank you. If you're like, gosh, I wish they just let me do engineering and
Yeah,
stop
yeah, yeah,
making me
yeah,
do this
yeah.
other classes and
I
foreign
know.
languages and what have
Yes.
you. Then you can blame him too. He was a
Right.
interesting duck. But you're right about Edison had no math skills. He also had no education. And he was sort of known, his reputation was of just sort of like going through it like a needle in a haystack. But that was what he did when he was stuck. He was actually a very, very creative person. And I think people don't want to think that because they're mad at him.
So was he like an intuitive inventor, I guess? Would
Yes.
that would be intuitive inventor rather than coming at it from a methodical,
Mathematical.
yeah.
Yeah, but interestingly, most of the discoverers I've studied have been intuitive, have been playing around with things and looking at them slightly different ways. But, yeah, he had no education, he also had no money. He was When he was a kid, he started working on a railroad as a person who sells, like, fruits and vegetables and newspapers, and he's like, what he was a hustler. Not a hustler, but a
But yeah, a go-getter,
entrepreneur. Go
entrepreneur,
get
yeah,
yeah, he was
exactly.
just, like, relentless,
Right.
and he's, like, 14 years old working on this thing. He's like, okay, first, I'm gonna bribe the porters so that I can make a fruit stand at the other place and use the train to take it over and sell it from one place to another at a discount, and he had the whole army of teenagers working for him, and then he starts his own newspaper out of stolen, like, type and makes his own newspaper, and then he hears about wireless, he's like, "Forget it, I'm selling everything, I'm gonna learn wireless."
Whoa.
So then he does
That's, yep.
wireless, he gets a patent, nobody wants it, so he's like, "Okay, it worked, but it just nobody wanted it." He's like, "I'm gonna do stuff that people want to
Want.
buy."
Okay, that was his grift. That was his thing that he was, he was going to keep
Right,
doing stuff until people bought it and until he made a
right.
success.
And I don't think he particularly wanted, like, lots of money, he just wanted to he wanted to be a great inventor, and he was just gonna do it by hook or by crook. You know what really inspired him? Are
What?
you ready for this?
What?
Reading Faraday.
Really?
Yes, he said one
Interesting.
of his most
Wow.
which was easy for him because Faraday had no math and
So all his
Edison had no math.
writings and his writings didn't include any heavy maths. Right,
Oh,
so he could
not only
understand them.
no heavy math, almost no math. There's
Right,
basically no equations in the whole
right.
thing.
Wow. There
So,
you go.
yeah, there's all connected. So then he started making things for telegraph companies to make them. He invented this thing that could send a telegraph automatically. It was sort of you put the thing in ahead of time, and we have letters from people like, "Oh, this will require no skill from people." That's just what I want. And he sold
That's
an
great.
electorium, this thing that could give shocks. And he's like, "It's good for
Oh,
rheumatoid arthritis.
this is
Also fun for the family."
fun for the
You
whole
could
fun for the kiddies, yeah.
And it was a bestseller. He's like, "This is great." And he just kept on inventing things. So it was I think the whole idea of, like, he was a mindless automaton is completely false.
Yeah.
But it doesn't I think that if you see what I mean.
Yes, totally.
And Tesla talked about math. He
Mhm.
talked about taking math classes, But if you read his papers, there's no math, or if there's math, it's weird.
Right.
So like he wrote this big paper in 1900 about increasing human energy. And it was like a 40-page paper. And it has one equation, and that's energy equals 1/2 mv squared. And he said, and v is the velocity, but you can't measure that. And m is the mass, and you can increase that by being religious, bathing regularly. Yeah, like
This is crackpot stuff. Yeah.
But in that paper, there are the iconic photographs of Tesla. The double exposure ones where he's sitting there reading a book and there's lightning all over him. You can't look at those pictures without being like, look at this beauty. Look what he can do. Look what. So that's the dichotomy that I'm talking about. We have this image of like Tesla was the great mathematical physicist, but totally wasn't. No, he was bonkers. And his mathematical physics was bonkers. I'm sorry, it was bonkers. But his devices were so beautiful that I wish we could admire him for the showman he was instead of
Right.
the mathematician, which he wasn't, if that makes any sense.
It makes sense. Have you been approached by the Teslarati? By the Tesla nutters? Have they started to contact you?
A little bit. Usually they start with you're an idiot and you're spelled wrong, and then they go to you're ugly, and then they get banned from me anyway.
Right. Yeah. But has anyone approached you to try and like prove that their widget is an over Unity device or anything? Have you been contacted by any of the over Unity crowd who worship? Yeah.
Well, lots of like, I want to tell you about my new theory of physics, and then you will promote it. And I'm like, I'm not a contemporary. If you have a new theory of physics, I'm
Go
not
to some
the person
professor
for you.
somewhere. Yeah, go
Right.
to some
You
physics.
need to get it published in a paper. And I think that's part of the whole, like, most people don't have an idea how new ideas are promoted. Like, they're just like, oh, you have a good idea. You convince enough important people to like it, and it will be liked. It's like, no, that's not how science works. You have to say where you got the idea from, why yours is slightly different, get it published somewhere peer reviewed, and then have peers complain about it. And then you get in the conversation till enough of your peers. But I'm not a peer. I didn't even finish my PhD. So I mean, I have sympathy. These people might have good ideas. Good ideas come from all over the place.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't know.
Exactly. But they think that you can help spread the word, and it just by becoming popular, as you said, then their theory would become popular and everyone would accept it and start research on it. But yeah, no, that's not how it works. Yes, us engineering YouTubers just get constantly contacted by, last thing, have you seen the Veritasium video and all the controversy surrounding that?
Yes, I did.
Right,
I did.
Right.
I wish I had commented on it right away.
Oh,
I'm feeling
you did. Did you do a video on it?
I mean, yeah, in a video. I wish I had.
Okay. Oh, I haven't seen that one.
No, I hadn't.
Okay.
No, I haven't.
Oh, you haven't?
I wish I had.
Oh, you wish
but
you
now
had.
I feel
right.
like,
yeah, because that is still going on. Like, that debate is just endless. It almost depends on your point of view. Are you a physicist or are you a practical engineer? And both observations, in my point of view, both ways of thinking about it are right. Yes, mathematically, Derek's right, but from an engineering point of view, it's like, from a practical point of view, no, that's not how we think about it as a practical design engineer. So it's like,
I'm not a design engineer at all, and my thoughts were exactly like yours. I'm like,
yep.
Well, okay, but how much do you need to have it light up? Like, what do you mean?
Right. And does current actually flow in the wire? Yeah, like, does current actually flow in the wire? Well, to us engineers, yes, it does. It flows inside the wire. You know, that's
Right.
sort of like the whole debate. Does it flow inside or outside the wire? Does it flow does energy flow inside the wire, or does it flow outside in the fields? And to my mind, both answers are correct. It depends on what you want to do. I mean,
Right.
you know,
Well, I mean,
is
it's
there
the
any
same thing with,
parallel
like,
to that in history? Do you think? I'm sure there
um,
would be somewhere,
oh yeah. I
but
mean,
I
there
can't.
was in the 1920s, there was huge debates about what do you call it? I was saying there's the waves in the air, and they wanted to get rid of the ether. Sorry, the ether. There was huge debate about the ether, which strangely was political because the Nazis didn't like ether because they thought it would be a good way to be against Einstein. Which, like, okay,
Right. So is that because the ether allowed them to do useful it allowed them to do useful things? Like it sort of fitted useful theories, yet it's not actually correct, yet it was a useful tool, so to speak. Was it a useful
well, it was more that so in the ancient Greeks had these whole idea of these different realms of, heavy things fall because heavy things rocks want to be with other rocks. So
rocks,
rocks will
right,
fall.
okay.
Fire wants to be with the fire in the sky. So fire smoke rises. And it's very those theories are very appealing
Mm,
because they kind of make sense.
right.
The thing about physics is that it doesn't initially make sense.
Sense. Yep.
Because if it did, we wouldn't need people to derive it. And so this whole idea of like rocks want to fall because rocks want to be with rocks and water wants to be with water and then
Yep.
air wants to be there and then smoke wants to be higher.
Yep.
It kind of makes sense. Things want to stop because they want to stop. So you roll something, it always stops. And that's very appealing. And then in 1801, I'm going to go with. And if I'm wrong on the date, oh well. This guy named Thomas Young was thinking about light. Newton thought light came in little blobs, but they had discovered that light. They discovered that different colors have different. You could split up the rainbow into the different frequencies, and the different colors had different amount of heat, including invisible light in the infrared. So they're like, oh, well, if it's got different colors and there's invisible colors, that kind of reminds me of sound waves. Like there's sound you can't hear,
Right.
and it's
right.
a wave. And there's this theory that it doesn't have any mass. So like that sounds like a wave. How do I prove it's a wave? So he builds himself a little water thing and starts splashing around in it, really.
Yeah.
And he figures out if he makes little patterns with it, with two little dots, he can make these interference patterns.
Yep.
He's like, okay, let's see if light does the same thing.
Young's
Shines the
double
light
slit
through the two little
experiment. Yep.
holes and makes the thing. And not only figures out that light's a wave, but each of the different frequencies, each of the different colors have different frequencies, and he can measure it with the experiment. So after that, they're like, well, if it's a wave, it's got to be a wave in something. So they brought back the ether from the old theories and said there must be ether. And actually, I found papers from like the 1830s, so way later, where they're still debating. They say, if you believe in a wave, then you need the ether.
Got it.
And then Faraday's like, well, how about these E&M waves? You don't need the ether. And Maxwell's like, no, I need it. I'm sorry, I need it.
This is great.
And then, so it was this debate, and who knows? And Einstein himself, he was like, he was sort of ambivalent. He kept on going, oh, I like it, I don't like it. Maybe you need it here. Maybe I want it back. And so it's a debate. But the people who are like, well, they've proven that it's true, and they've proven it's not true, and it's a conspiracy. That part isn't how physics works. But it's a fascinating debate that I'm sort of tempted to make videos about and also terrified.
Yeah. Do it anyway. Come on. People People are going to complain. Doesn't matter.
That's true.
Oh, it doesn't matter. To my mind, Young's double split experiment is I think it's the most impressive experiment that I know of. It's the most mind blowing experiment that I know of. I think anyway. I just every time I think about it, and the consequences of it, I'm just absolutely fascinated by it. It's absolutely amazing. And then how they shoot individual electrons through the split. You know, I like.
That's insane.
You know, it's like
physics.
You know, I can understand the light through and the interference patterns, but then individual electrons through, and then individual electrons on different sides of the planet with two people doing the same experiment on two different sides of the planet, join the data together, boom. There's
I know it's physics. That's part of the problem in terms of countering pseudoscience. Is that real science is weird.
It is weird.
It's weird. I mean, like, it's hard for most people to tell the difference between quantum entanglement and machines that work at 100% efficiency. You're like, well, that seems way more normal. 100% efficiency seems way more normal than quantum entanglement.
Right.
And you're telling me the 100% efficiency is garbage and quantum entanglement is real?
Really? Yeah. Oh, we could go on forever, but we've actually been doing this an hour and 40 minutes. Kathy,
oh my goodness.
I know. No, this is great. We could.
And we didn't really Chatty Cathy for nothing.
And we didn't even really go through I was going to get you to go through the chronicle.
The book. I just keep on buy the book.
The Lightning Tamers. Seriously, everyone should get a copy. Is an audio version coming? An audiobook version?
Well, see, here's the thing. In order to make an audiobook, it takes me a lot of time and it costs a lot of money. So I've decided to ask other people to pay the money. So I started a GoFundMe.
Oh, you have? For the audiobook?
Yes.
Oh, excellent.
Yes. I will send a link you can put there. And I think I've made $2,000 already, which is amazing. So once I get to a certain point, I'll just start making the audiobook and release it as soon as I can.
Why does it cost so much? Because you have to go into a proper studio that does audio books properly and
it needs to be edited.
And edited,
and it needs to be edited well. And the level of the editing that I do for my YouTube video shows me two things. One, I'm not at that level. And two, it is a much bigger deal. So I'm just going to pay someone
to do it. Absolutely.
To do it, to help me out, to follow along, also to be a monitor, sort of I read it and they go, oh no, you mispronounced that. You slurred your words. Do that one again. Maybe do it with a little bit more energy. I don't think they'll say that. But
have you thought about getting one of those professional readers, one like someone famous to?
Thought about it, but the truth is I am obsessed with it.
It's your passionate story. Yep. Yeah.
And I think people would expect to hear my voice.
Yeah. Yes, they would. You being the YouTube. People who are going to buy it, they expect to hear you. Yes.
And I think it would be fun to do, although I'm pretty sure reading the whole thing out loud, I'll find something. I'm like, I wish I said that differently.
It doesn't. Yeah, I'm sure it'll sound very cringy or just sound wrong when you actually read it out loud. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it has to come from me, so I
totally
want to do that.
Yep.
So awesome. We're a little bit. The book comes out October 12th. It's well then.
So the book
should be out.
But you can pre-order, right?
Oh yeah. You can pre-order paperback, hardback, ebook,
Kindle. Yep.
All that jazz, and from a bookstore or Amazon.
Fantastic.
Whatever you want to do.
Is it self-published, or did you go through or did you find a publisher for it?
I was thinking about when I started, and I realized I am way too much a control freak to let anyone else have control of this thing. I don't want someone saying, you know what? I don't think this has too much. This is too hard. It has too much science, or or we want you to add a chapter on what you think is going to happen in the
Oh God,
future.
no,
I'm
go
like,
away.
no,
Telling me what to do.
what?
You know, yeah,
I have
no,
no idea.
no.
So I wanted, and I didn't want to have someone else. If you have a publisher, they choose the title, they choose the back cover, they choose the cover, they choose the words on the back, and they will do something like, what's up? Like James Watts. And you're like, no, he's not in the book. No, 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 no.
I know.
So yeah, it doesn't. So that's why and I also wanted to be able to choose my own price. I know that sounds weird,
No,
but
that's good.
especially I was thinking about that with the textbook. Most people, when they make textbooks, cost like
hundreds of dollars.
hundreds of dollars, and I feel like that's keeping people away from learning. And I want the opposite. I'm like, how do we get this in the library? How do we get people to learn new things? I don't want it. I mean, yes, I would love to make money. More money is nice. I'm not against money. I have a bigger passion than that, if that makes sense.
Trust me, that's how I operate. I could be, a multi-millionaire by now with, my audience or whatever. But no, I just I just do things for fun.
You don't want to
no,
sell garbage.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Yep.
Sometimes tempting, but I'm with you.
Right. All right. Well, we'll put links down below. Thank you very much, Kathy. This has been awesome because we've talked about you several times, and we've and it's great to have the history on. Although we could do this again and do a totally different show again about going through just the chronological history, because we had no idea how this episode was going to go. We just it went where it went. And we didn't even get to talk about sort of like a timeline thing, and it's like
I know I barely talked about I talked about chapter 1 and chapter 2, and I don't think a little bit about Faraday, and I mean,
I'm just looking here at 5.2, the painter who annihilated space and time. Oh my goodness, I want to go read that right now. I mean,
that was Morse, as in Morse code.
Oh, okay. There you go. Because Morse was a painter. Okay.
Yes, he was, and a pretty good one. Not a nice fellow, but a good painter.
Fantastic. Oh, it's great. Anyway, thank you, Kathy, for coming on.
It's been so lovely to talk to you. This was so much fun.
Excellent. I enjoyed it. Thanks. Catch you next time.
Bye.